Welcome to today's Savant live webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be discussing Working on Your Own Terms, a Guide to Semi-Retirement. My name is Libby Muldowney. I'm a financial advisor here in the Rockford office. And my co-presenter today is Miriam Falaki. She's an advisor in Atlanta. Welcome, Miriam.
Hi, Libby. Thanks for having me. We have over 1,000 registered participants today, and I'm really excited to dive into this topic.
Yeah, let's get started. The topic of today's presentation is Working on Your Own Terms, a Guide to Semi-Retirement. Now, this wouldn't be a financial presentation if we didn't start out with some disclosures. So just make sure you're all aware this is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be specific personal advice. If you do have unique situations you want to discuss with a professional, you need to go to them for your individual recommendations. Today's just high level. But we're going to start with the fun stuff. We're going to begin talking about what a semi-retirement lifestyle might look like by envisioning your future, and then how you're going to fund that. How are we going to replace that paycheck with all the different components that need to come together to fund a retirement cash flow source. And then we don't want to overlook healthcare. If we're talking about semi-retirement, that means we may be talking about leaving the workforce prior to age 65, which is prior to Medicare age, and you may have to be looking around for creative ways to get health insurance. And then we don't want to overlook that small but important detail of taxes and how to manage those throughout retirement. And then we'll follow up with some action items and some steps you can take. And finally, don't sign off early. We'll have some time reserved for some question and answer at the end today. So Miriam, envisioning the future, let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Libby. I love starting off with this topic here. So what we want to do is, take a minute to vision what semi-retirement would look like for you. And we'd love to make this more interactive. So please feel free to add in the chat what you're envisioning. So we'll start by asking off these questions. What are you doing? Who are you with? How are you spending your time? What have you stopped doing? And what have you created space for? Now, the essence of this exercise is really to understand and articulate what's most important to you. If we do this right, your vision could be a simple sentence or two. And this can serve as your North Star as you navigate the path ahead and make critical decisions. So here's a few examples that I'm seeing coming through the chat. We have someone that wants to have more flexible hours with sabbaticals in between, creating more time to pursue hobbies. Someone else is saying, want to move to remote work with less hours to be present with family and friends. Run my own business so I can be in control and decide when and how much I work, and work without travel so I can focus on my health and well-being. All great visions for semi-retirement, I would say. So I want to take a step back into what adult life used to look like. For generations, workers have had a clear-cut career path that ended with retirement. In previous generations, you would retire, get a gold watch, a pension, and maybe live up to 10 years after retirement. People just wanted leisure and relaxation since they had a shorter lifespan. So with this less than 10 years of retirement and fixed income, retirement looked completely different back then. So fast forward to what it looks like now. Today, much has improved, with modern medicine and increased wealth. If we're lucky and healthy enough, retirement nowadays is almost the same amount of time as your working career. So while you're working, you not only need to fund your current lifestyle, but you do need to be prepared to pay for the things you want to do in retirement. It doesn't have to be this work, stop and relax. We're seeing more and more people want to stay fulfilled during this semi-retirement or early retirement lifestyle. So these are obviously the main goals that we see typically for people with semi-retirement. Usually they want to be able to take advantage of these aspects in life that they weren't able to fully embrace when they were working. Travel, part-time work, time with family, and volunteering. My neighbor is a great example of this. She was a school teacher for about 20 plus years. She was in a spot to be able to retire financially, but she didn't really quite want to just stop and relax at that point, right? So what she decided to do was she started to plan ahead and think about what she could be doing as an option at semi-retirement. She decided to start nannying and tutoring part-time. She works at her local food bank once a week, every week, so she's able to give back to the community. Her daughters don't live here in Atlanta, so she's able to travel to visit them and see her grandchildren. So she's really able to hit on all four of these goals while still living a fulfilling life. So, you've probably noticed we haven't talked much about numbers and money just yet, but that's intentional. Your financial resources are merely a tool to help support your vision and goals. So we need to clarify the vision and goals before we start making the financial decisions. And now that we're working through that exercise, we can move on to financial planning action items: how to fund your semi-retirement, health insurance, and taxes. If you're at this crossroads in your 50s or 60s, there are 3 critical financial components you need to solve for. There may be others as well, but these 3 are the non-negotiable financial issues you need to be prepared for.
Thank you, Miriam. I think all of us advisors lately have been recognizing this shift in retirement planning. Your point about all work, no play, and all play, no work, it doesn't feel the same when you're spending decades in retirement. I think when you mentioned most people spending maybe 10 years in retirement, that's exactly what they wanted. But now with longer timeframes, we have to adjust our expectations and adjust what we think retirement is going to look like. But as you mentioned, we need to fund that retirement. So what are we going to do if we don't want to work full time anymore, but we also need to make sure we're meeting all of our financial goals? Well, in retirement, that may change. You may continue to work part-time. That's often a part of semi-retirement. We'll factor that in. But you're also going to be looking at when to claim Social Security, what accounts should I pull from, is there a pension involved? All these different components need to come together, and they all come together in their own unique time frame. So where do you start? Well, you want to start by coming up with a budget amount. Of course, how much do we need to spend our lifestyle? You want to look and see at how long you're planning on being in retirement. And as we mentioned, with longer time frames, a lot of times we are starting, if you're starting with retirement at 65 and living into your 90s, which is what we plan for, we are planning for a long time frame if people are living longer, and we certainly don't want to run out of money before the end of your life expectancy. So it can be a decades-long time frame that we're building into this, which means inflation absolutely has to be considered into that spending plan, as over time your money will buy less dollars, and you may have to begin to take more out to meet your budget goals. So all these things need to be factored in, as well as how the investments are going to perform. Healthcare, as we mentioned, is going to be a big part of this, and just what your expectations are going to be in retirement and where we're going to pull from to fund it. Now, I mentioned there's going to be different account types that you might be using in your portfolio. You're probably familiar with your 401k through your employer, or if you're self-employed, maybe you're funding an IRA. Most of those traditional retirement vehicles that allow you to defer your income tax come with limitations on them. And one of the biggest limitations is the age at which you are able to withdraw without a penalty. And for most of those accounts, that's at 59 and a half. Now, there can be some exceptions to that, and there are some planning strategies where maybe you could take money out penalty-free, but generally speaking, that is the default plan for those types of accounts. So when you're talking about early retirement, we want to be cognitive of the access to some of those accounts at certain ages. Now, if you have a Roth account or traditional or Roth 401k, a lot of times you can take money out of a 401k at 55, perhaps. All plans are a little different, but that's different than if you were to roll that 401k into an IRA. So you want to be aware of the terms of your plan. And if you do need to start taking money out prior to 59 and a half, once you're 55, the 401k may be an opportunity for you to be able to do that. And then under age 55, you could use your Roth contributions or a non-retirement account, what we refer to as a taxable account. That has no age restrictions on it when you take the money out. It's taxed differently than those other accounts. And of course, when we're funding your retirement, that gets layered into this decision as well. And then the big question about Social Security. We all know that's going to be a part of our retirement plan, but there's a lot of different things to consider. So with Social Security, you can claim as early as 62. And some people, when they're talking about early retirement, they think the easy answer is, well, I need to claim Social Security as early as possible so that I can replace my paycheck. Now, there's some things that may play into this that might say defer. So for example, if in your early or semi-retirement, you do intend to work part-time, you might want to wait until your full retirement age, which depending on your birth year, that's probably somewhere around 67. You want to be aware of that full retirement age because if you claim Social Security prior to that, even if you're eligible, there is what's called an earnings test. So there's a limitation on the amount of income you can have prior to full retirement age while claiming Social Security. And if you exceed that income, Social Security will pull back some of the benefits you've received. So while it might sound like I'm going to retire early, so I should claim Social Security early, maybe you're retiring from that 9-to-5 corporate job, but you're going to do something part-time you enjoy, and you want to be careful of that earnings limit when you claim Social Security. Now, post age 67, or your full retirement age, if you continue to defer claiming the Social Security benefit, it will increase each year that you defer. That continues up to age 70. Once you reach age 70, it no longer accrues an additional benefit for you. So for most purposes, claiming at 70 is going to be the latest you would most likely defer. There are some specific circumstances, such as ex-spouse benefits and survivor benefits. Those are all going to play into your unique circumstances. So there's not an easy way to determine when anybody should claim Social Security. We need to determine when you should claim Social Security based on your other resources, your plans to work or not. And then of course, life expectancy might play into that as well, certainly. So a hypothetical scenario, we're looking at a couple that knows they want to retire early. They know what their Social Security budget is going to be, and they're planning to do some part-time work. Now you can see at $12,000 a year, it's certainly not replacing their past paycheck, but it is going to be part of their plan. But they have a budget of $120,000 a year. Now, to keep this simple, I'm going to assume that this is an after-tax number. So they're just going to get $10,000 a month in their checking account. That's the budget they want to have. So when we take Social Security and some of those part-time earnings, we recognize that we have a shortfall of about $40,000 a year in order to meet that $120,000 goal. Well, that tells us that that's something that we need to save for and have a portfolio built up so that we're able to access that in retirement. There's a general rule, just a starting point, that if you withdraw 4% of the balance of your portfolio on an annual basis, you should have a sustainable model, meaning you won't necessarily deplete the portfolio over time. So if you had $1 million portfolio and you're drawing 4%, that's that $40,000 a year. So this helps you to determine, have you saved enough? Are you on track to save enough? Or what your expectations are of how much of your retirement cash flow might come from your portfolio. If you haven't saved up enough, maybe you need to add a little more to that part-time line item, or maybe you need to lower your budget. All these different variables can be shifted around to make it work for you. For many of us, though, there is that fixed portion, whether it's Social Security, pensions are still around for certain areas of the workforce. They're not as popular as they used to be. But when you have those fixed income sources, then you want to build those supplemental sources around it to support that. So that's what you want to look at, how you're going to withdraw that and at what rate. And you can see on here now, I've got a range of 3 to 5% as what we call sustainable draw rate to take out annually from the balance of your portfolio. Now there's different things that are going to factor into whether or not you should take on the low end or the high end of things. And that's where your investment strategy, your risk tolerance, and the time frame that you have are all going to come together to determine where on this range you should be. Okay, so a 4% is the sweet spot, and you're trying to figure out maybe you can take a little bit more than that, or maybe we should be a little more conservative. As we mentioned, some of those variables will include the time frame that you have. So the longer the time frame you have, you probably want to be more conservative on this spectrum and maybe draw closer to that 3 or 2%. You don't want to stress the portfolio over a longer period of time. So that might indicate a lower than 4% draw rate. Of course, your expenses and your budget and those other cash flow items are going to play into this. That's going to help determine how much you're going to pull out of the portfolio, and maybe you'll end up taking out a little bit more than 4%. But you have to keep in mind your long-term goals and if you are okay seeing the principal of your portfolio deplete over time. So at 4%, the hope is that you would more or less be spending the earnings and you wouldn't be depleting your principal. But for some of us, tomorrow isn't promised and we're okay. We can't take it with us. So spending a little bit of that principal is okay. Well, that's going to put you a little bit on the higher end of that withdrawal if you want to spend a little bit more. And then, of course, how those investments are positioned. So the more growth orientation you have in your portfolio, the longer term return is going to be expected to be higher. So if that's the case, you should be able to draw out a little bit more. The trade-off is if you have a more conservative portfolio and therefore a lower expected return over the long term, you'll want to be more on that conservative end of this spectrum. Portfolio balances go up and down over time, and it's okay to monitor this. And throughout your retirement, some years you might take more and some years you also might take less based on what's going on throughout the period of time that you're working with. And that's where we want to look at a more dynamic illustration. So again, that 4 or 5%, just a rule of thumb, just a starting point. But we want to run this through a little more stress and see what the portfolio is able to tolerate. So when we enter in all of these components, how much you have saved, how much you plan to spend, how the portfolio is invested, and how long you have, we then put it into this software and a tool that runs what is called a Monte Carlo analysis. And it takes those variables and then applies 1,000 different market trials. So each of these green squiggly lines here represents a different market trial, and you can see a wide range of outcomes. There's nothing but roses in some of these, and you end up having multi-million dollars in your portfolio because returns have been nothing but great for 30 years. Well, that's on the tail end of the bell curve, but also so is that running out of money scenario. So you do see some red lines in this strategy where the money is running out to zero. And of course, those are fewer, but they're out there as a potential. And then you see the fat part of that bell curve or the majority of those scenarios they all land in that green area. So what this is telling us is that 87% or 870 of these 1,000 market trials are considered successful. Successful just means you didn't run out of money. So with a wide range of outcomes, you could have outcomes with much more money than others. But what we want to make sure we are watching for is that we don't let it just run out of money. There are these scenarios where it runs out. You can see the red lines going below zero. But when you work with a partner, we're revisiting this on an annual basis. And we're making adjustments as they're needed along the way. So it's unlikely that we would just set up a plan and never adjust according to what changes in your life or what's changing over time. We're going to make those adjustments to keep you on path and keep the plan successful. But at an 87% success rate, we consider that in the confidence zone, meaning that's good. We don't need to get to 99% or 100% necessarily, because we do anticipate throughout time we'll make adjustments based on what's going on in your life or what the market's doing. Again, some years you might take 7 or 8% out of the portfolio. Maybe you're taking a big trip or buying a new car, so you're taking a one-time large expense. And then the next couple of years, of course, you're not repeating that, and now you're down at 2%. So that's okay. And that's why we want to recognize that as long as we have an average and an expected path, we can make adjustments as we go through time. So that's just budgeting. But of course, we talked about inflation on those expenses, but healthcare is another line item in the budget. And of course, it's got its own pieces that need to factor into it. Inflation being one of them. Miriam, can you take us from here with on healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. And Libby, you've generated quite a few questions in the chat during your presentation there. And I just wanted to let you guys know we will get to those questions at the end of our presentation. So we have some really good ones from there. But yeah, I'm my turn, health insurance. So it's that big ticket item that you want to try and get a handle on before you retire, especially if you're planning to retire before age 65, before you're eligible for Medicare. Health insurance is really a big reason many people will delay retirement, especially if you've relied on employer coverage your entire life. It's not uncommon at all for a couple in their 50s or 60s to pay over $2,000 per month for healthcare costs. But you do have some options. Take into consideration your spouse or partner. If they're still working, you could consider getting on their coverage if you're under 65. And then we've seen a number of people able to negotiate health insurance as part of their semi-retirement comp package. You can also utilize Cobra continuation package. Cobra will give you an 18-month bridge. So say you want to retire at 62, you can be on Cobra for a year and a half, and then you just have to kind of find how you will pay for healthcare until you reach Medicare age. And then shopping the Affordable Care Act, depending on your income, those ACA policies could be eligible for a generous tax subsidy that could be worth $10,000 or more. And then if you have an HSA account, this is a great resource to fund your healthcare expenses. Hopefully you were able to save into it and have those funds invested. The good thing about these accounts is that any distribution is tax-free as long as it is for a qualified healthcare expense. Now, here are some estimates on what healthcare could cost for a healthy individual based on their age. These numbers just indicate the monthly premiums. You can plan to add an extra $5,000 to $12,000 per year per person for additional healthcare costs throughout the year. And healthcare does increase a lot faster than our standard inflation. So it's by far one of the biggest expenses you'll face in retirement. The cost of healthcare just seems to keep increasing year over year. So just make sure this is something you've thought through before you jump into semi-retirement. And then, often we see people go back to work just to take advantage of company-sponsored benefits like health insurance. One of my friends was actually ready to retire and had the funds to support early retirement, but paying those healthcare premiums was a hard bullet for her to bite. She decided to get a job driving a school bus just for the school year. She was able to get healthcare by working only a few hours per day, and she has summers and holidays off. People could also look into other opportunities in the school system, like a librarian or a secretary. And then there are also other big box retailers that provide benefits for part-time employees. So if you want to retire early, you don't necessarily want to pay for the healthcare expenses, you could look for other options for part-time employment just to see what kind of benefits they would offer.
I love that, Miriam. Just jumping in, I loved your example about the school bus driver. I have a client and they are outdoor enthusiasts and they're talking about retiring maybe in Colorado and they're not quite on path, but we filled in that gap. I said, hey, just be a park ranger. You're able to go out there and hike all day, but you can get a little income and maybe working for the government, you get some benefits. So definitely want to explore those options.
Yeah, great one. And then summers and holidays off. You only get that if you're a teacher or a student. So I wouldn't mind that one. But then taxes, this is also top of mind to everyone, no matter where they are in their life. Being semi-retired gives you a lot of flexibility on how to handle your taxable income. Your tax picture is going to be different in semi-retirement, and if you're not careful, you may come across some nasty tax surprises. What I often see is that a big consulting contract might bump someone up into a higher tax bracket. Or maybe somebody doesn't realize that in addition to federal and state taxes, they're also subject to self-employment tax. That's where you get the pleasure of paying both the employee and employer side of Social Security and Medicare taxes. Either one of those things can easily generate a nasty surprise to the tune of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 or more. So it's critical to have this plan to look to minimize your total lifetime tax bill. And then there's another paradigm shift from W-2 world. Your income will probably be more variable, and you may also have more control over your income. You need to use those factors to your advantage. If you don't plan right, those factors are only going to work in favor of the IRS. So in the simplest terms, we want to lower your income in the high tax years and potentially increase income in the low tax years so we can get closer to a happy medium or equilibrium. Typically, people's earnings peak in their 50s. Those are their highest tax years, the peak of their career. And then when they enter semi-retirement, their taxable income may drop. And then eventually taxable income will pick back up in their late 60s with Social Security and retirement account distributions. So we often see this high, low, high income pattern we want to take advantage of those low years and reduce the high years. So a woman named Mary is a great example of this. She developed a successful coaching practice in semi-retirement that she loves, but the income varies a lot from year to year. She said it's like riding a roller coaster in the dark. She never knows where it's going, which can be stressful. But the silver lining is that she gets to take advantage of those ups and downs. For those high income years, she has set up a retirement plan, which allows her to defer over 73,000 of income on top of all the other self-employed business deductions she gets to take. When she has a down year, she does Roth conversions to fill up lower tax brackets. It's generally a good time to do those Roth conversions when you're in a lower taxable income bracket. So she's electing to pay a relatively low tax rate now so that her Roth IRA can be tax-free forever and not subject to higher taxes in the future. In essence, she's using her retirement accounts to move income between different years, smoothing and minimizing her lifetime tax liability. And then the next layer of how you can control your taxes is managing your portfolio. So the top goal in tax planning is to eliminate tax. And if it can be eliminated, then pushing it into the future in the future years is the next best thing. Tax loss harvesting allows taxpayers to recognize a loss in a current tax year to offset other realized gains. If a taxpayer has no capital gains, up to $3,000 of those losses may be used to offset ordinary income. And those unused losses may be carried forward indefinitely. We like this strategy because you can stay invested in the market, but take advantage of losses to offset those gains. When the market is down, this is an opportunity for you to make lemonade out of lemons. The goal is to find a substitute investment like what was sold so that you can maintain that exposure to the markets. This is where it comes in handy to strategize with a financial advisor on how to best take advantage of those losses when they do come up. And then, of course, just watch out for those big life events. If you're selling your home, investments, business, receiving a large bonus, if you're in the corporate world and have the opportunity to defer your income, just make sure you're not electing to defer that income all in the same year that you retire or even 1 year after. That could be a large tax bill. And then, plan ahead. Bring your year-to-date pay stub when you meet with your advisor or your tax preparer, just to make sure that you have the right deductions. And then make sure you schedule a time to talk to your tax preparer on their off season. February, March, probably not the best time to meet with them. But if you can meet with them towards the end of the summer, if there's anything you can take advantage of that year, you still have time to do that before the year ends. And then just ensure that your advisor is looking for those tax efficient opportunities in your portfolio. That can help limit a lot of the surprises.
Thank you, Miriam. Taxes aren't fun, but clearly they're important. And my assumption is that for many of our participants today, this is new information. Tax planning during your working years is very different than tax planning in retirement. The example you gave of shifting which retirement account to pull from to control your income and therefore control the level of tax you pay, it's not a strategy many people can do during their working years. And there can be a lot of moving pieces to it. So it is new for most people. And it's important that you recognize that there's a difference between a tax preparer and doing tax planning. And just because you have a professional prepare your taxes, they might not necessarily be thinking of these things or bring them to your attention. It might not be within the scope of what they do, because like I said, planning and preparing are two very different strategies. And you want to make sure you're working with a team that can work through that with you. But now we can talk about the next steps. So one of the big things we wanted to do is make sure that you've got to set aside time to adjust your expectations, as these retirement timelines are looking significantly different than they did for previous generations. When you looked at that graph that Miriam showed us earlier of having our working years, for many people, let's say it's between 35 and 65, and then they retire at 65. But if they live to age 90, well, 30 years on either side of that equation is a very long time to plan for. And the industry trend that we're seeing with the people that we are working with is that leisure for 30 years is not fulfilling. Part of what makes leisure so wonderful is the contrast to the work that you're doing, and to have a break from that and to be able to relax is what makes that so wonderful. But over time, if that's all you're doing, it starts to become your new norm, and it's not as novel anymore, and you might get restless or bored. So with these longer timeframes, making sure that you know that you'll probably want to do something to remain engaged, and maybe you can get off the workforce or at least out of that full-time grind a little bit sooner and plan for some time to work part-time so that you can work until you're ready to claim Social Security or until you're age 65, but you don't necessarily have to start drawing off your portfolio right away. So there's a lot of planning that you need to consider. And one of the things that we kind of joke about or that we see is if we're working with somebody and they're talking about their trip to Europe, you know, they're going to go over for 2 weeks and they've picked out all the places they're going to visit. They've researched all the history they're going to explore. They've reviewed all of the hotels where they're going to stay, and they've read the menus of the restaurants where they're going to eat. And before they've even left, they have spent hours and hours planning the mechanics of that trip. Unfortunately, many people, when they're approaching retirement, don't spend near that amount of time planning for this time frame. I think there's this expectation that they're going to just kick back and take it easy. And I think it's important to recognize that those expectations might want to shift. That's a big trend we're seeing in the industry. But looking forward and trying to project where you're going to be is hard, and I think that's why many of us hesitate to do too much planning on it. Trying to look into the future, so to speak, the crystal ball gets a little cloudy. So a thought exercise that you can go through is to start with the end in mind. So I want you to picture that you are now in your 90s and you're in your rocking chair with that lemonade that Miriam referred to that you made out of all the lemons life gave you, and now you have this sweet glass to drink, and reflect back on your life and all the things that you accomplished. If you put yourself in that position, are there things that bubble to the surface that you know you would regret if you didn't get to do those things? Would you know that there was something that you missed out on that just pops to your mind right away? Well, that's a good place to start, to try and start building a plan and develop things that you want to do. And maybe it's something like if you never traveled because you were always working and didn't have enough vacation time, maybe you look for a job where you will have the opportunity to travel and go see the world or go see different parts of the country that you didn't get to see before, if traveling is what bubbles to the surface. You don't necessarily have to wait for a full retirement to be able to enjoy those things. Now, there's going to be a link in the chat where you'll be able to click and you can schedule a 15-minute call with somebody here at Savant, and we can talk about your unique circumstances and what's important to you and all the components that you have in your plan and start to build a plan around that. Now, don't go anywhere because we have some really great questions. I wanted to just get through the disclosures, again, remind you that this was for education purposes and is not meant to be specific advice. But now I want to get to the questions. As we've been talking here, Miriam, I've seen a couple of themes come through, and it seems like a lot of people have similar questions in the chat. What are you seeing out there?
All right, Libby. Here's a good question here. Is it better to take Social Security as soon as I can, or should I wait?
That's a good one. And I know everyone's wondering that. And it seems like no matter who you talk to, you get a different answer. And I touched on that in the presentation and talked a little bit about the planning that we do. Now, when we do financial planning, we are planning for longevity life expectancies. We want to plan until your 90s because we want to make sure that we're accounting for that long time frame so we don't run out of money before the end of your life expectancy. Well, on paper, when we run the numbers, if you're living a long life expectancy, the numbers tell us that deferring to age 70 will net you a larger amount from Social Security over your lifetime. So on paper, that's the answer we get. But in real life, I recognize that there's a personal component to when you want to claim Social Security. And a lot of people have very strong opinions about claiming Social Security and strong feelings about what's right for them. Some people are adamant, that's my money. I put it in that plan, I'm gonna get it out of that plan. I want it in my pocket as soon as I can. Others might say, hey, tomorrow isn't promised. I do not know if I'm gonna have a long life expectancy. So I don't wanna defer a single day. I wanna claim it now. And all of those answers are correct. We also need to build in there your other assets. So do you have a portfolio that you can draw on for a couple of years until maybe your full retirement age? And then we can start drawing from Social Security and turn off those distributions from the portfolio. So what are the other pieces of your picture that are going to determine what the right time is for you? And again, it's going to be different for everyone, and there's no right or wrong answer. And what comes across in the numbers is only part of it. It is okay to have some personal preference of when you claim Social Security, because the truth is we don't know how long anyone's going to live. So it's really hard to know if you get the right answer.
Real quick,
Also,
Libby.
oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. I just wanted to add, every year that you delay taking Social Security, it goes up guaranteed 8% for your benefits. So that's also something to keep in mind. Like Libby said, if you have a portfolio that can support that, support the withdrawals, you'll get an 8% increase in your benefits by leaving it in there. And then, of course, we have this bad joke in our industry that if you could tell us when you were going to die, we can tell you exactly when to take it. So it's really just a matter of your resources and how to best take advantage of what you have.
Very good points. Thank you. Clicking through here, there's some investment questions. One here says, I heard retirees should have their investments in bonds. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll take that one. So, we've always heard that the closer you get to the retirement, the more conservative you should be. And in a way, that is true. You just have to take a look at I'll go back to Libby's example for that couple. They have 68,000 combined Social Security between the two of them, the part-time work, and then to supplement that, they want to take $40,000 from their portfolio. So the way we like to look at that is we want to have at least 4 to 5 years of your living needs in bonds and cash when you're retiring, because the worst thing that can happen is that once you're retired and the stock market crashes or it goes down, you don't want to have to liquidate when you need the cash to live off of it. That's where people get really hurt, because those losses are not real. They're paper losses until you actually realize them. And once you realize them, you really can't make it back up. But if you've planned ahead and kind of put in that cushion for that bonds and cash or that safety net that you have to pay for your living needs, you would be able to weather that storm, because we know it's inevitable. The market will go down at least one in every 4 years. It's down. So if you plan ahead, you can weather those storms. On average, it can take about 4 years to go from peak to trough to back to peak again. So like I said, if you have that in bonds and cash, you can kind of let the stock side of your portfolio recover while drawing from the safe side. All right, here. Oh, this is a great one, Libby. We do see a lot of online calculators for people to make these assumptions on their own. A question just came in that said, can I just use an online calculator to determine what to save?
Yes, the endless desire to Google to get all of the answers. Online calculators are prevalent. They're accessible to anyone. Oftentimes, if you just log into your 401k, they're going to have a little box in the corner. And you can input your current balance, your savings rate, and when you want to retire. And it'll give you an idea of how much you might have in retirement. And it's a good place to start, but it's missing some pieces usually. So when I was going through that Monte Carlo analysis, one of the big differences between the Monte Carlo and a calculator is a calculator uses a flat line return, let's say of 8%. And the calculator assumes you get 8% every year if that's the return assumption that you're going to use for your portfolio. Well, you got to use something. But with the Monte Carlo analysis, we recognize that while the average may be 8% over your retirement time frame, on any given year, you might not see 8%. You might see plus 10, plus 12. You might see 3, 4, -2%. You might have a year where you get 20% return. But on average, you'll get the 8. So you'll be all over the place with return. And the Monte Carlo analysis gives us a better range of outcomes rather than just trying to come up with one specific number. And I think that range is very helpful, because when we can't really predict what the future is going to look like, it at least answers the question, am I going to be okay? As I said, there'll be a range. You may end up with a lot of money in the portfolio, or maybe only $1 left, but they all will say, I'm going to be okay and I'm going to meet my goals. Another layer to the software that we use is that inflation assumption. when you're looking at an online calculator and it spits out a dollar amount, is that in today's dollars or is that in the future of what it will buy me in 20 years or what it'll buy me, you know, 10 years into my retirement? $5,000 today means something very different than it will mean in 20 years. So when you're looking at that calculator, has it factored that in or not? And most likely it hasn't. And that's a really important thing to factor in over these long time frames. In addition to that, taxes. So you can maybe put a tax rate into an online calculator, and that answers one question, you know, your federal tax rate, but it doesn't include necessarily your state tax rate. Our software allows us to not only put in, you know, the state tax rate, but the different account types you have. So if it's an IRA that's tax deferred, if it's a Roth account, or maybe it's a non-retirement account that's going to be taxed at capital gains rates, as well as if that retirement account's taxed to your state level or not. There's many different pieces to that, and an online calculator is not going to incorporate all of those pieces. So I think it's a good place to start if you're a DIY and you want to go out there and see where you are. I think it's good for savings to get you on track to be putting money into an account, but I don't think they're ideal for the retirement phase of a portfolio. I do see a theme of questions here, Miriam, about debt. Should I be debt-free, or should I pay off my mortgage before I retire? That seems to be coming up in different ways in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, we do actually get that a lot with our clients. So we've come off of a historically low interest rate environment up until recently. So, you know, if you were able to lock in a 30-year interest rate at less than 4 or 3%, you can't really find those rates anymore. And, you know, if you're going to take out a big chunk of your portfolio to pay down your mortgage before you retire, you know, once you pay that mortgage off, you can't get that money back. So it's really a matter of how your portfolio is invested and, you know, what your expected rate of return could be. So if you expect to get at least 6 or 7% and your interest rate is 3%, I mean, you have like a 3% arbitrage or gap of what you could be making on that money versus paying off that mortgage. Of course, if you're in the position to completely pay it off and not risk, you know, running out of money with that portfolio invested, sure, that's a great, you know, it's not a bad plan, but just keep in mind that those low interest rates are pretty hard to find now. And it's really not that, it's not going to be a big hindrance on you in retirement. So, you know, you just got to take a look at what you have for your funds, what resources you have available to pay for retirement. And if that mortgage, that monthly mortgage bill is really going to eat away at it, or if you want to take a big chunk from your portfolio to pay it down. You know, if it's a low interest rate, I'm all for keeping that mortgage and keeping your portfolio invested. All right, Libby,
So
we got.
I think it's okay. Oh, sorry. I think it's okay to add some personal preference to that too. Some people feel very strongly about being debt-free. And again, what the paper says and what the numbers say when we crunch them is certainly something we want to know, but it's okay to incorporate some personal opinion into that decision as well.
Yeah, you just got to put pen to paper and see what makes sense to you. Okay, Libby, we get a lot of questions about retirement accounts. And this one is, I read I should be funding my Roth. Is a Roth better than a traditional IRA?
You know, they're both good. So it depends, right? When you're trying to determine between funding a Roth or funding a traditional IRA, the question you're really asking yourself is, do I want to pay my taxes today or do I want to pay my taxes later? And typically it depends where you are in your tax bracket and in your life, you know, timeline, right? So you mentioned earlier that oftentimes what we see is that income peaks in our 50s. So if it's a dual income household, if we're talking about a couple and they're both working and they've been in their careers for a while and they're at the peak of their earning potential, they're going to be in a much higher tax bracket at that phase of their life. And at that phase of their life, saying I want to pay these taxes later is probably the answer, because if they defer it into their retirement, they won't have that dual income and maybe they'll be in a lower tax bracket and therefore they'll end up paying less tax overall. Now, for young individuals who maybe are early in their career and are at an entry-level kind of pay position, so they don't have a high income tax bracket, well, they would want to volunteer to pay their tax at that tax bracket. So putting money in a Roth at that phase makes sense for that individual. The other thing is we don't know what your tax bracket is going to be in retirement because we don't know what tax rates are going to be. They change periodically. And it's hard to know with certainty, am I going to pay more tax today or pay more tax later? So a really great, well-rounded financial plan should have multiple buckets. So you'll want to have some Roth money, you'll want to have some deferred money, and then some non-IRA or taxable money that you can pull from as well. Because not only are you able to pull from those at different ages, but you can control your income. You gave that illustration earlier about realizing some now, forcing some into later years. And having all three of those buckets allows you to have flexibility and be nimble in whatever tax environment we're in the future. So they're all good to that end. In addition to those accounts, I think we have time for one more out here, Miriam, regarding your presentation on healthcare. How do I know when I should use my HSA? When's the right time to start spending those funds?
Well, I'll start by saying the HSA account is my favorite of the accounts that you can contribute to. The reason being is it has a triple tax benefit. You know, when you're contributing to it, it lowers your taxable income. As it grows and it's invested, that grows tax deferred. You don't have to pay income tax on that. And then when you pull the money from it, you don't have to pay any taxes on that as long as it's for qualified healthcare expenses. So what I typically like to tell people is try not to use your healthcare funds or the HSA funds to pay for like your doctor copay visits or your medicine. You know, if it's $20, $50, $100, those are typically items you can afford to cash flow. I would prefer to save those for higher, bigger ticket items, like if your kid needs braces, or you know you have to go under some surgery and you have a large medical expense. If you don't have the savings to support that, that would be a good time to use your HSA funds. But the more you can delay using it, the better it will be for you, especially if you're considering retiring early and you don't have that spouse that you can rely on their employer coverage, or you're not going to work part-time and have those benefits and you're going to have to pay for that on your own. The HSA is a great way to pay for those healthcare premiums. So just keep that in mind and take a look at your HSA account. I would encourage you to make sure it's invested. Most HSA accounts will make you keep at least a small cash balance, $1,000 or less. Some might allow you to do more, but you do have the flexibility to keep a portion in cash, and then the rest you can keep invested and, benefit from that tax-free growth.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Well, the questions are still coming in, but I think we're about running out of time for today. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Miriam, and everybody enjoy your day and happy retirement planning.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.